The judge called my wife my love, and the entire courtroom heard it. I remember the way the sound echoed across the walls. At first, it didn't register. I thought maybe I had imagined it. Maybe someone else was whispering to someone near me. But no, the words came from the bench, from the man who was about to decide my future, from the same man who had looked at me like I was something rotten beneath his shoe. The moment he said it, everything went silent. Not quiet, silent. That kind of silence that hits harder than any scream. People turned their heads, some gasped, and Emily, she froze. She didn't even blink, just sat there, with her eyes locked on the judge, lips parted, as if the air had been sucked right out of her lungs. It was like watching a glass house shatter in slow motion, every single shard catching the light, every truth suddenly exposed. My lawyer slowly turned to me. No words, just a look. That look you get when something way bigger than expected just landed in. I didn't move. My hands clenched around the edges of the table, so tight that my knuckles went white. My chest ached like my heart had forgotten how to beat. And then it hit me. The entire case, all the accusations, the lies. This courtroom wasn't just a place of justice. It was a stage, and I was the fool being played. But now, for the first time, the curtain had pulled back. It had all started 3 months earlier. Emily stood in the living room, calm and composed, as officers led away in handcuffs. Liam, my son, had been asleep in the other room, or at least I hoped he had been. I still don't know if he saw it all. The flashing red and blue lights bouncing off the walls. My face pressed against the cold metal of the squad car. The silence of my own wife watching me leave, as if I were a stranger. The police told me she had filed for an emergency protective order. She claimed I had been physically and emotionally abusive, that she was afraid for her life. I laughed at first, not because it was funny, but because it was impossible. Emily was the one person I trusted beyond anyone. 12 years of marriage, shared birthdays, hospital visits, sleepless nights with our newborn. How could she look at me and say those things? How could she believe them? But as the charges piled on and the system began to grind its way into my life like a slow-moving avalanche, I realized something terrifying. Belief didn't matter. Perception did. And Emily, with her soft voice and her perfect tears, knew exactly how to craft a perception that made me look like a monster. In court, she sat like a broken flower, fragile, innocent. I watched jurors tilt their heads with sympathy. I saw the judge nod slowly as she spoke. I heard the soft sniffles from the back row. Not one person questioned it. Not one person looked at me. Until that moment. Until the judge's mic stayed on. The man with the gavel, the robe, the power to tear my life apart, had just called my wife his love. 2 words. That was it. But those 2 words were a hammer that cracked everything open. And I knew. This wasn't just betrayal. It was war. A war I didn't ask for. A war I wasn't prepared for. But one I had no choice but to fight. Because when the person you love most turns on you, when the one who shared your bed now points a gun at your character, you either stand up or disappear. That day, I chose to stand. And the truth started to bleed through the lies. Have you ever had someone lie about you so deeply that even you started to wonder if it was true? Tell me below. Write "My Truth Matters" in the comments if you've ever been silenced or doubted for something you didn't do. Your story could give someone else the courage to speak. And if you believe more people need to hear stories like mine, raw and real, hit that subscribe button. Not for me, for all the people who are still trapped in silence, waiting for their moment to be heard. My name is Daniel Herrera. I am 39 years old, and until recently, I thought I had a pretty ordinary life. I live in San Antonio, Texas, in a small, quiet neighborhood with wide sidewalks, barking dogs, and the smell of cut grass on Saturday mornings. I worked as a mechanic at the same garage for nearly 10 years. My hands always smelled like oil and metal, and honestly, I kind of liked it. There was something comforting about routine, something grounding about using your hands to fix things, at least things that could be fixed. I met Emily at a blood drive. She was a nurse, confident, kind, The kind of woman who remembered your name even if she had only met you once. She wore scrubs with cartoon characters on them and smiled like it cost her nothing. I was hooked instantly. A year later, we were married under a huge oak tree behind my uncle's ranch. It rained that morning, but the sun came out just in time for the ceremony. She looked like something out of a magazine, and I was proud. So damn proud. Emily always wanted to be a mother. I remember the way she decorated Liam's nursery. Pastel colors, stars on the ceiling, a mobile that played soft lullabies. We lost our first baby in her second trimester. It almost broke her, but when Liam came 2 years later, healthy and wide-eyed, she held him like he was made of glass and cried harder than I'd ever seen. That woman, the one who used to hum lullabies while folding baby clothes, she is the one I kept trying to find even as things changed. Because they did change. All at once, not in a movie scene kind of way, but slowly, the way water hollows a rock, subtle, gradual, invisible from the outside. After Liam turned 5, Emily went back to working full-time at the hospital. Night shifts mostly. At first, I thought she was just tired, distant, overwhelmed maybe. But then she stopped asking about my day. She stopped cooking, stopped laughing at my dumb jokes. There were more secrets in her eyes, more silence between us at dinner. I chalked it up to stress. Marriage goes through phases, right? I started working overtime to give her more space. I'd pick up Liam from school, cook, clean, tuck him in, wait for her to come home. Sometimes she would come back and go straight to the shower without saying a word. I told myself not to take it personally. I told myself she was going through something, and as her husband, it was my job to be patient. But patience can feel a lot like being invisible, and eventually, that invisible feeling wraps around your throat and makes you question your own worth. There were moments where she would suddenly be sweet again. She would bring home pastries from the cafe near the hospital. Or we would have movie nights with Liam, and she would rest her head on my shoulder like nothing was wrong. Those moments were like crumbs dropped by someone trying to keep you from noticing how lost you really are. Looking back, I see the signs. A text message she didn't want me to read. A scent on her shirt that didn't belong to me. The way she would take calls in the bathroom with the faucet running. I noticed them all, but I ignored them because the truth felt more dangerous than the lie. And now, here I was, in a courtroom, accused of being a violent man, a manipulator, a danger to the woman I loved and the child I lived for. I never laid a finger on Emily, not once, but she knew exactly how to phrase things, how to make her voice tremble just enough, how to make every moment sound like a slow descent into hell. She painted a version of me that didn't exist, and people believed her. Because why wouldn't they? A nurse? A mother? A wife? Tears in her eyes. A man like me? Just another working-class veteran with calloused hands and a temper, probably. Easy to label. Easier to discard. In the court of public opinion, I had already been sentenced. I remember looking down at my own shoes during her testimony. Worn leather. Dirt in the stitching. Shoes that had walked countless miles for our family. Shoes that had carried me through deployments overseas, hospital hallways, cold nights spent pacing with a feverish child, and now they stood motionless on a courtroom floor, as if they too could not believe what they were hearing. Emily never looked at me as she spoke. Not once, but I watched her the entire time. I watched the way she blinked more when she lied. I knew that about her. Her tell, and every blink felt like a betrayal. There is no scream louder than the one you hold inside your own head. I was not perfect. No man is. I got frustrated. I yelled when the bills piled up. I sometimes shut down instead of opening up, but I never made her feel unsafe. And now, I was not only losing my home and my wife, I was losing Liam, the little boy who called me his hero, the boy who once waited outside the garage with his toy wrench, ready to help me fix engines. He didn't know his dad was being painted as a villain. He just missed bedtime stories and pancakes on Sundays. I kept thinking, how did we get here? How did 12 years of loyalty, hard work, and family dinners turn into courtrooms and restraining orders? And then, when the judge whispered those words, "My love," the room spun. everything shifted. For a moment, it was not about defending myself anymore. It was about why she had done this, why this man, with the robe and the gavel, looked at my wife like she was his. That's when the story really began to unravel. If you've ever felt betrayed by someone who once said they loved you, I want to hear from you. Comment below with the words, "I deserve the truth." If someone ever twisted your story or painted you as something you're not, your truth matters. And if this story resonates with you, hit that subscribe button. We are building a space where the unheard are finally listened to, and your voice belongs here. The night they took me from my home, I remember the flashing lights bouncing off the front windows, like a warning I hadn't seen coming. It was almost 9 p.m. Liam had just fallen asleep in his Spider-Man pajamas after begging me to read the same story twice. Emily had said goodnight to him with a tired smile, kissed him on the forehead, then walked right past me without a word. That wasn't unusual anymore. What was unusual were the 2 patrol cars pulling up outside our house minutes later. When the doorbell rang, I opened it without hesitation. I hadn't done anything wrong. I hadn't even left the house that day. But the look on the officer's face was all it took to make my stomach drop. Calm, but cold. Like he had done this 100 times and was already sure I was guilty. "Daniel Herrera, you're under arrest for domestic assault." I froze. The words didn't register at first. I asked him to repeat himself. I even laughed a little, thinking there had to be some mistake. Maybe they had the wrong house, the wrong guy. I kept waiting for someone to say it was a misunderstanding, but no one did. They handcuffed me right there in the living room, while Emily stood behind them, not crying, not yelling, just watching, arms folded, her eyes empty like a window with the blinds shut. I asked her what was going on. I begged her to tell them the truth. She didn't answer. She didn't even flinch. That silence was louder than the cuffs tightening around my wrists. They didn't let me talk to Liam. I asked. I begged. I shouted as they walked me out the door. I screamed his name, hoping he was still asleep and wouldn't have to see his father dragged away like a criminal. But part of me knew he had woken up. Part of me knew he had heard everything. At the station, they sat me in a cold gray room with a metal table and a mirror I knew had eyes behind it. They read me my rights, told me Emily had gone to the hospital with bruises, and claimed I had pushed her against a wall, said she was afraid for her life, said this wasn't the first time. I felt like the walls were closing in. I had never hurt her. Never. Not once. We had arguments like any couple, but I had never raised a hand to her. I was raised by a father who taught me that real strength was measured by how well you held back your anger, not how much damage you could do with it. And I had carried that lesson with me every day of my life. But none of that mattered now. In the system, you are guilty until proven innocent, especially when the person accusing you is calm and composed and says all the right things. Emily had the words. She knew what to say. She had years of experience in the ER, writing medical reports, dealing with abuse victims. She knew the language of pain and fear. She just never expected to use it on me. I was held overnight. No phone call, no explanation. Just 4 concrete walls and the sound of my own thoughts crashing into each other. The next morning, I was released on bail. A condition of the bail was that I could not return home. I could not contact Emily. I could not see Liam. My lawyer handed me a manila folder with a copy of the emergency protective order. In bold letters, it stated that I was to stay at least 300 feet away from my own family. I didn't know where to go. My phone was dead. My wallet had $37. I had 1 change of clothes and no plan. My sister Maria was the only person I could think to call. She picked me up without asking a single question, just hugged me tight and said we would figure it out. She believed me from the start. She always had. Maria had never liked Emily. She said there was something behind her eyes that felt too calculated, too perfect. I used to brush it off as sisterly jealousy. But now I wondered if Maria had seen something I refused to see, something I didn't want to believe could live in the woman I married. I stayed in Maria's guest room. It was small, with old wallpaper and a squeaky ceiling fan, but it became my safe haven. I spent hours staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of my marriage, trying to pinpoint when it all started to fall apart. The court date was set 2 weeks later. I remember walking into that courtroom with my suit from our wedding, the only one I owned, wondering how the hell we got from vows to this. Emily sat across from me, flanked by a victim advocate and a legal representative. She wore a pale blouse, minimal makeup, no jewelry. She looked the part, like she had been coached. She never once looked in my direction. When the judge entered, I felt the tension in my back tighten like a coil. And then she spoke, calm, clear, her voice trembling at just the right moments. She told the court I had a temper, that I had shoved her during an argument, that she feared for her and Liam's safety, that she had seen signs I was losing control. And in that moment, I started to wonder if she believed it, if she had convinced herself of her own version of the truth. The human brain is strange. It can twist memories, edit reality, even rewrite the past if you feed it enough fear or justification. I began to wonder if Emily had rewritten our story in her head, turning my frustrations into threats, my silence into danger, my absence into abandonment. Or maybe she was just lying. Maybe it was always about something else: custody, money, a new man. I didn't know yet, but the seeds of doubt had been planted, and they were growing fast. The judge granted a temporary restraining order and scheduled a full hearing for a later date. I walked out of that courtroom feeling like a ghost, like I had died in some invisible war and no one even noticed. That night, Maria sat with me on the porch, holding 2 mugs of tea. She didn't say much, just placed her hand over mine and said, "Daniel, people show you who they are when they think you can't fight back. Watch closely now." And I did. I started noticing the cracks, little things that didn't add up, the timing of her injuries, the medical reports, the fact that Emily's closest friends suddenly stopped responding to me, the way she carefully crafted her words in every document. It was too clean, too rehearsed. I knew then I had to start fighting back, not with anger, not with fear, but with the truth, with everything I had left. If someone has ever tried to rewrite your story without your permission, I want you to comment below. Write, "I know my truth," because sometimes the only way to survive a lie is to cling to the truth like it's your last breath. And if these stories hit close to home, subscribe to this channel. We tell stories that others are afraid to say out loud. And maybe, just maybe, it's time we started listening. It was a routine hearing. At least, that was how it was supposed to be. A procedural formality in a courtroom that smelled faintly of wood polish and desperation. The kind of place where people lose their homes, their children, and their dignity, all in the span of a few carefully spoken sentences. I sat there beside my lawyer, stiff in a suit that no longer fit the man I had become. My hands were cold. My stomach was tight. I was trying not to look at Emily, who sat across the room like a porcelain statue, poised, fragile, untouchable. Her expression was unreadable, calm, just like always. The judge shuffled papers at the bench. Judge Mark Dalton, a man with perfect silver hair and a voice that made everything sound like a verdict. I had seen him 3 times before. He never looked at me for more than a second. He barely blinked when my lawyer spoke. He nodded more often when Emily's attorney addressed the court. I had chalked it up to routine bias. Maybe I just looked like every man who had messed up before me. Maybe he saw me through the same lens society does when a woman cries and a man stands silent. But that day, that specific moment, everything changed. Emily had just finished giving her statement. She had spoken softly, emotionally, her words full of pain and regret. She said she wanted peace, that she wasn't trying to destroy me, that she was simply afraid and needed to protect herself and our son. I watched the courtroom drink her in like gospel. I could feel the judgment in the air. It clung to me like smoke. Then, something happened. The judge leaned forward. It looked like he was adjusting his microphone. He pushed a button, thinking he had muted it, but he hadn't. And in the silence that followed Emily's testimony, with everyone's emotions still raw, he whispered it. "You were perfect, my love." The words cut through the silence like a blade. For a full second, one moved. No, I thought maybe I had imagined it. Maybe someone coughed or shuffled papers. But no, it was real. I saw it. I saw Emily freeze. Her face went pale, her lips pressed together, her entire body suddenly stiff like a statue made of secrets. My lawyer turned to me slowly, eyebrows raised, face completely blank. Then the murmurs started. The court clerk looked up, confused. One of the guards near the door shifted his stance. Emily's attorney leaned over and whispered something to her with wide eyes. And Judge Dalton? He knew. You could see it in the way his face dropped. He looked around, trying to play it off, but it was too late. Everyone had heard it. Everyone had heard a judge refer to a woman in the middle of a domestic violence case as my love. A woman he was supposed to remain impartial about. A woman accusing her husband of being a danger to her and her child. And I was that husband. My ears rang. My vision tunneled. For a moment, I thought I might pass out. Cleared his throat, stumbled over his next words, and then quickly ordered a recess. His gavel struck the bench like thunder. Court is adjourned until further notice. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at anyone. He just stood and walked out. Emily didn't move. She sat there, still frozen, still pale. She didn't reach for her lawyer. She didn't even turn her head. She just stared forward, like the whole world had cracked in front of her, and she was trying not to fall in. I stood up slowly. My legs barely worked. My lawyer touched my elbow gently, as if to say, stay calm. But there was a weight in my chest I could no longer carry quietly. That was the moment I realized the truth wasn't just close. It had been in the room with us the entire time, hiding behind a black robe and a cold gavel. I had always felt the odds were stacked against me, that I had walked into a courtroom already branded guilty because of a narrative crafted so carefully by someone who knew how to look innocent. But now, the very man who held my future in his hands had exposed something dark, something intimate, something personal. The courtroom cleared slowly. Whispers filled the air like fog. Did you hear what he said? He called her my love. Are they involved? Oh my God. I wanted to scream. I told you. I wanted to grab every person in that room and force them to see what I had seen for months. The inconsistencies, the behavior shifts, the manipulation, but I didn't have to, because now they had seen it for themselves. And nothing could unhear those words. You were perfect, my love. I rode the elevator down in silence. The fluorescent lights flickered. My reflection stared back at me from the steel doors. I didn't look like the man I was a year ago. That man had a family, a home, a future. This man was learning how to breathe again in a world that no longer made sense. Outside the courthouse, I finally exhaled. It wasn't victory. It wasn't closure. It was just oxygen. Kind you forget you need when you've been holding your breath for months. Maria was waiting for me in the car. When I told her what had happened, she didn't even flinch. I knew it, she said. I knew something was off about him. She always looked at him like he was more than just a judge. I just didn't want to say it out loud. But now we say everything out loud, Daniel. No more silence. And she was right. Silence had been my prison for too long. And now the cracks were showing. The truth had slipped out in a whisper, but it was louder than any lie ever told about me. If you have ever witnessed the mask fall off someone you once trusted, if you've ever heard one sentence that changed everything, I want you to share it in the comments. Type "they almost fooled me," because that's how it works. People like this almost win, until they don't. And if this story resonates with you, subscribe. Not because it's just my voice, but because your voice belongs here too. This is where we speak the truths others try to bury. And every single time someone listens, the silence loses its power. The days after the courtroom incident were a blur. Not fast, not chaotic, just heavy. Like every second carried twice its weight. I barely slept. My phone buzzed non-stop with messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Some were curious, some were concerned, and a very few, were apologizing. People who had believed Emily without question. People who had whispered behind my back, but were now forced to reconsider everything. Because now the lie had slipped. And not just any lie, a lie spoken by a man in robes who had sworn to uphold justice. My lawyer filed a motion the next morning. Motion for judicial misconduct, request for investigation, request for case dismissal based on conflict of interest. The words didn't mean much to me at first. They were just legal steps. But each paper filed felt like a shovel digging up the truth that had been buried beneath months of deception. Within a week, the investigation began. Emails were pulled, texts, surveillance footage from the courthouse lobby, parking lot records, hotel bookings. I couldn't believe what they were uncovering. There were messages between Emily and Judge Dalton going back nearly 10 months. Nothing explicit at first, just the kind of small talk that dances on the edge of inappropriateness. Then the tone changed. The language shifted. Familiarity turned into something unmistakable. Pet names, late night, messages, compliments on appearances, arranged meetings. One message from Emily read, "Can't wait to see you in chambers again. Feels safer with you than with him." The implication made my skin crawl. The man deciding my future had been building a relationship with my wife behind closed doors. The man who called me aggressive had sent her hearts at midnight. The man who was supposed to be impartial had already chosen sides before I even opened my mouth in court. My stomach turned as I read each line. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't some tragic misunderstanding. This was a plan. What started as whispers in a courtroom had now become a full-blown scandal. The media caught on. A local journalist published an exposé. The headline read, "Judge accused of relationship with plaintiff in high-profile domestic case." My name was in the article. So was Emily's. So was his. It felt surreal, like watching your own life from outside a window. People stopped me at gas stations, at the grocery store. Some gave me nods of support. Others avoided eye contact. No one knew what to say, because no one wants to believe that the system can be that broken, that personal, that cruel. But it was, and it had almost destroyed me. Emily stopped responding to her attorney. Her social media went dark. Her job at the hospital placed her on leave. It was like the spotlight had finally turned, and she wasn't ready to stand in it. Meanwhile, Judge Dalton was removed from the bench pending investigation. No hearings, no rulings, no more black robe. And from what I heard, this wasn't the first time his name had come up in questionable circumstances. There had been rumors, whispers from other attorneys, talk about favoritism, about strange rulings, about women he seemed a little too friendly with, but nothing ever stuck. Until now. Now, the whispers had turned into a roar. My lawyer told me that what happened could lead to a full case dismissal, that I could get my record cleared, that the restraining order might be lifted, that I might be able to see Liam again. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty, because even as the truth came out, the damage had already been done. I had spent months being painted as a monster. I had lost time with my son that I would never get back. I had nights where I questioned my own memory, my own character, all because two people decided they wanted to rewrite reality for their own convenience. And the worst part was, I didn't even know why. Why? Had Emily done this? Was it love? Was it power? Was it just escape? Or had I been nothing more than collateral damage in someone else's fantasy? That question haunted me more than anything else. I replayed every conversation, every cold glance, every moment where she had seemed distant, distracted. I remembered the night she told me she was working late, and I found out the hospital hadn't scheduled her at all. I remembered the perfume on her clothes that wasn't hers, the way she always locked her phone, the way she flinched when I touched her shoulder like it was an intrusion. Signs. All of them. I had seen them, but I had been too loyal to believe them, or maybe too scared, because believing the truth would have meant admitting that the woman I built a life with was slowly dismantling it behind my back. I started seeing a therapist. Maria insisted. She said trauma doesn't always wear bruises. Sometimes it shows up as silence, as doubt, as the feeling that you're still holding your breath months after the danger is gone. The therapist told me I had what they called betrayal trauma, that my brain was stuck in a loop, trying to process the fact that the people I trusted most had become the source of my deepest pain. She said it would take time. I told her I didn't know if I had any more time left to give, but I showed up. Every week, I showed up. And slowly, I started to reclaim pieces of myself, not all at once, not in some dramatic breakthrough, but in moments, into memories. In small truths, I allowed myself to believe again, like the fact that I was a good father, that I was not what they said I was, that love should never come wrapped in control or manipulation. And then one morning, Maria handed me a letter. It had come in the mail, no return address, just my name, written in a handwriting I hadn't seen in years. Inside was a short note. Daniel, I never meant for any of this to happen like it did. I thought I was in control. I thought I could keep things separate, but I lost myself. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know that. Emily. No apology, no explanation, just fragments of regret. I folded the letter and put it away, not because it meant closure, but because sometimes silence speaks louder than any words someone can offer. If you have ever been burned by someone you trusted and still managed to walk through the ashes with your head up, I see you. Comment below with "I'm still standing," because surviving isn't just about what you endure. It's about what you rebuild after the storm. And if you believe these stories need to be told, stories that peel back the mask and show the truth beneath, subscribe to this channel. This space exists for every voice that has been buried by someone else's lies. And yours deserves to be heard. The night after the letter arrived, I sat alone in the kitchen with nothing but the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock keeping me company. That letter, so short, so void of real substance, had stirred something in me that I couldn't ignore. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat there, numb, thinking about the years I had spent believing I knew Emily. The quiet dinners, the laughter over takeout, the way she would fall asleep with her head on my chest, like she was safe. And now, all of it felt manufactured, or worse, weaponized. Maria walked in, holding her phone close to her chest, like it contained something dangerous. Her expression was cautious, but determined. She told me she had found something I needed to see. I followed her into the living room, sat beside her on the old corduroy couch that squeaked when you shifted your weight. She opened her phone and pulled up a public court database. And there it was. 2 names, 2 different men. Both had once been in relationships with Emily before she met me. Both had filed official requests to have protective orders removed after being falsely accused. One had been accused of stalking, the other of assault. Neither case held up. In both situations, charges were dropped due to inconsistencies in testimony and lack of evidence. But by the time the truth came out, both men had already lost their jobs, and one of them had been evicted from his apartment. I sat there, stunned. This wasn't new for her. This wasn't some emotional overreaction or isolated mistake. This was a pattern, and it hit me like a freight train. Emily wasn't just trying to escape. She was repeating something. A loop cycle she had learned to survive by rewriting herself as the victim and the man in her life as the threat. Maybe it started as a defense mechanism. Maybe it was a learned behavior. Or maybe she had simply discovered that playing the victim gave her power, sympathy, control. I had been the next target, just another chapter in a long, cruel book. Maria dug deeper. She reached out to a friend who worked in hospital administration and asked off the record if anyone had ever complained about Emily's behavior. Within days, word came back. She had been investigated once before for unprofessional conduct. Nothing major on paper, just a warning. But when Maria pressed further, she found out that Emily had formed a close relationship with a patient's husband during a long-term care case. There were whispers of inappropriate messages, flirtation, emotional manipulation. It had almost cost her the job, but she transferred to a different department before anything formal could be done. I didn't know what to feel. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me wanted to throw a chair through the window. But mostly, I felt betrayed by myself, because the signs had been there. I just hadn't wanted to see them. There was the way she would gaslight me during arguments, flipping the blame so fast my head would spin. The times she would accuse me of being too controlling if I asked simple questions, like why she got home at 2 a.m. from a shift that ended at midnight. The tears that came without warning during conversations she wanted to end. The way she turned everyone around me into a potential enemy, the moment they questioned her narrative. She was a master at turning her wounds into weapons, and I had been blind. I remembered a night early in our relationship, before we got married. We were sitting on the porch of my old apartment. She told me about a man who had cheated on her, said he tried to blame her for the problems in their relationship. I held her hand while she cried. I promised her that I would never hurt her like that. Now I wondered if that story had ever even been real. I started questioning everything, every memory, every conversation, every shared look. It was like someone had taken a red marker to my past and drawn thick lines through every moment I thought was genuine. And then I realized something even darker. She hadn't just fooled me. She had fooled everyone. Her friends, my family, our neighbors, even the system. The court believed her without question. The police acted on her word alone. The judge, blinded by his own relationship with her, used the power of the law to punish me before I even had a chance to defend myself. I thought about all the men out there who had gone through the same thing and never got a microphone left on in their favor. Men who were still fighting to see their kids, still sleeping in their cars, still wearing the label of abuser because someone they loved twisted the truth to serve a purpose. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to just clear my name. I was going to expose everything. Not for revenge, not out of hate, but because the truth mattered. Because silence was how people like her kept winning. And I had stayed silent for too long. I contacted both of the men listed in the court database. At first, they were hesitant, suspicious. I couldn't blame them. But when I told them who I was and what had happened to me, something shifted. Their voices cracked. One of them said, "I thought I was the only one." We talked for hours. They shared stories that mirrored mine almost perfectly. Sudden accusations, restraining orders, emotional whiplash. One of them lost custody of his daughter and hadn't seen her in 3 years. The other had tried to take his own life. The damage she caused didn't stop at lies. It cut deep. It fractured lives. But now we were connecting the dots. Now we were gathering evidence. Now the narrative was shifting. For the first time since this nightmare began, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a survivor stepping out of the rubble. If you've ever uncovered someone's pattern too late, if you've ever realized the betrayal ran deeper than you imagined, I want you to comment with the words, "I finally see it." Because naming the truth is how we reclaim our power. And if this story resonates with you or someone you love, subscribe now. These stories don't just need to be heard, they need to be felt. And every voice in this space helps make sure no one has to suffer in silence again. It was during the second therapy session that I finally admitted it out loud. I said, "I don't know who I was married to." The therapist didn't flinch. She just nodded, like she had heard that same sentence 1,000 times from different mouths wearing the same expression. That mixture of shame, confusion, and disbelief. It's a strange thing to grieve someone who is still alive, to mourn a version of a person that maybe never even existed, but I had to start there. Because if I didn't, I was going to keep dragging that broken version of love into every part of my life. Emily had dismantled me piece by piece, not with fists, not with shouting, but with subtle discredit, with perfectly timed silence, with emotional exile. She didn't scream, she distanced. And every inch of distance made me question my worth. I told the therapist about the day I forgot to buy milk, and she didn't speak to me for 2 full days. How she made me feel like I had done something monstrous. How I apologized so many times I lost count, even though I knew deep down it wasn't about the milk. That's the thing with emotional abuse. It rarely leaves bruises, but it leaves you doubting your own memory, your own voice, your own instincts. She had a talent for making me feel unstable without ever raising her voice. If I questioned where she had been, she'd say I was paranoid. If I asked why she was pulling away, she'd accuse me of smothering her. If I tried to explain how I felt, she would shut down completely. No eye contact, no response, just retreat into another room. I'd end up apologizing for the crime of needing connection. And I learned, over time, that silence could be just as violent as any scream. I became smaller. I talked less. I laughed less. I started to plan entire conversations in my head before speaking to her, just to make sure I didn't say the wrong thing. That wasn't marriage. That was slow erosion. And now, here I was, a man trying to rebuild his life after barely surviving a version of love that almost convinced him he was the villain. After that second session, I walked out of the office and sat in my truck for 15 minutes, just breathing, letting myself feel something, anything, without guilt. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't apologizing for existing, but there was still one piece missing: Liam. The court still hadn't ruled on visitation. Everything was frozen in a legal limbo, but I needed to see my son. Not just for me, but for him. Because he had been a silent witness through all of this. He had watched the lights flash on our driveway, heard the muffled arguments, felt the tension that filled the house like fog. Kids don't need to understand every detail to feel the fracture. I started writing letters to him. I didn't know if he would ever read them, but it helped me cope. I wrote about the day he was born, the first time he said, "Dada," the way he used to fall asleep holding my finger. I wrote about how much I missed making pancakes with him on Sunday mornings, how I missed hearing his laugh echo through the garage while I worked. I told him the truth, not the courtroom truth, the real truth, that love should never make you feel afraid, that no matter what anyone said, his dad had always been fighting for him. I mailed one letter to my old house. No return address, just a simple envelope with his name. I doubted Emily would give it to him, but part of me hoped that maybe, just maybe, she would feel a shred of guilt and let him read it. 2 weeks later, I got a reply. It was written in crayon. "Hi, Dad. I miss pancakes. Love, Liam." I read it 15 times. That one sentence did more for my healing than every legal document combined. It was proof that the connection hadn't been broken, that somewhere inside all the noise and lies, my son still remembered who I was. I brought that letter to court. My lawyers said it wouldn't move mountains legally, but emotionally, it spoke volumes. It was a reminder that I wasn't just fighting to clear my name. I was fighting to restore a bond that never should have been broken in the first place. The next court hearing was different. A new judge, neutral, professional. No whispers, no bias, just the law. Emily didn't make eye contact with me. Her lawyer looked exhausted. The media had stopped showing up. The scandal had faded from the headlines. But my story hadn't faded. It was still unfolding. And now I had a voice that could no longer be silenced. I gave my testimony calmly, clearly. I presented the timeline, the evidence, the letters, the patterns. I didn't plead. I didn't perform. I just told the truth, and when it was over, the judge looked at me and said something I'll never forget. "You have demonstrated remarkable restraint, Mr. Herrera, and a deep commitment to your child. This court recognizes that." Those words didn't fix everything, but they mattered, because for the first time, someone in power saw me not as a case number, not as a defendant, but as a father, as a human being. The ruling was simple: shared custody. Supervised visits to start, until Liam was comfortable. The court would reevaluate in 90 days. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't full freedom, but it was a door, and I was finally allowed to walk through it. When I saw Liam again, he ran to me. No hesitation, no fear, just that same little boy who used to fall asleep in my lap. He hugged me and whispered, "I knew you didn't do anything bad." And just like that, something inside me healed. If you've ever had to prove your innocence to the people who should have known your heart from the start, I want you to write in the comments, "I never gave up." Because survival is not just about staying alive. It's about staying true to yourself when everything around you tries to rewrite your story. And if you believe the truth deserves space, if you know someone who's been through something like this and needs to feel less alone, subscribe. This isn't just a story. This is a space for voices that were once buried, and your voice matters more than you think. The first few supervised visits with Liam were quiet, not because he was afraid, but because he didn't quite know how to bridge the gap between what he remembered and what he had been told. I didn't push. I didn't ask questions. I let him talk when he was ready, and I filled the silence with warmth, with pancakes on paper plates and superhero coloring books, with stories from when he was a baby that only a father would know. Slowly, I saw his shoulders relax, his eyes light up, the way he would lean into me when I read to him, like muscle memory pulling him back to safety. The court-appointed supervisor was a kind woman named Carol, mid-50s. Sharp eyes, gentle voice. She watched everything, not just the words exchanged, but the energy between us. On the third visit, she took me aside and said, "You're doing something right. He trusts you." I nodded. But inside, I wanted to cry, because that trust had been almost destroyed by people who never should have had the power to touch it. One afternoon, as we built a Lego castle together, Liam asked me, "Dad, why did you go away for so long?" That question hit me like a freight train. I paused, heart pounding, wondering how much truth a 6-year-old could handle. But I also knew that lying would just continue the cycle of confusion he'd been dragged into. So I said, "Sometimes grown-ups get things wrong, and when that happens, it takes time to fix them. But I never stopped thinking about you. I never stopped loving you." He didn't respond with words. He just nodded and handed me a red brick, like he was saying, "It's okay. Let's just keep building." And we did. Around that same time, something unexpected happened. One of Emily's old friends, Amanda, reached out to me on social media. We had never been close. She was always polite, but distant. I hadn't heard from her since everything fell apart. Her message was short. "I think you should know the truth. Can we talk?" We met at a small coffee shop across town. Neutral territory. I didn't know what to expect, but the moment she sat down, I saw the weight she carried. Amanda told me she had distanced herself from Emily months before everything went public. She said she had seen changes, manipulations, lies, that she had stayed quiet out of fear and discomfort, but that after the judge scandal broke, she could no longer carry the guilt. Then she said something I'll never forget. She told me what she was going to do. She said she knew exactly how to make it look real, that if she cried enough and stayed calm, no one would question her. She said, "You were too passive to fight back." I stared at her, stunned. My hands were shaking, not because I didn't believe her, but because a part of me had already known. I just never had the words spoken out loud by someone else. Amanda handed me a small flash drive. She said she had saved messages, just in case, voice notes, screenshots. I thanked her. She left quickly, maybe afraid of what she had stirred up. But I sat in that booth for almost an hour after she was gone, staring at the little device that could finally collapse the narrative Emily had worked so hard to build. I didn't open the files right away. I waited until Liam was asleep that night, safe in Maria's guest room, tucked in with his stuffed raccoon and a belly full of grilled cheese. Then I plugged the drive into my laptop and opened the folder. There were 5 voice messages. I recognized Emily's voice instantly. In one, she was laughing, saying how easy it was to manipulate the story. In another, she was practicing her testimony, like rehearsing for a play. She even joked about crying on cue. I sat frozen as her voice echoed through my headphones, each word slicing deeper than the last. The screenshots were worse. Texts between her and a friend about how she had the judge wrapped around her finger, about how she wanted to make Daniel pay, about how she had done this before and it always worked. I felt sick, but I also felt something else rising. Not rage, not sadness, clarity. This was the evidence the system couldn't ignore. The pattern, the intention, the manipulation laid bare. I called my lawyer at 11 p.m. He answered groggy but alert the moment I said, "I have something." The next day, he filed a motion to reopen the custody case with new evidence. The court responded quickly. The weight of the prior scandal still hung heavy over their heads, and now they had tangible proof of perjury and premeditated defamation. It wasn't just about custody anymore. It was about justice. A new hearing was scheduled. This time, no media, no dramatics, just facts. Emily didn't show up. Her lawyer arrived alone, pale and quiet, carrying a folder he barely touched. When the judge played the audio files in court, the silence in the room was suffocating. The judge's face didn't move, but his fingers tapped the desk slowly, like counting every lie. The ruling was swift. Full custody granted to me. Emily was to receive supervised visitation only, pending a psychological evaluation. The restraining order was reversed, my record was expunged, and a formal inquiry into her previous allegations was opened. It was over. But in many ways, it was just beginning. Because freedom after injustice doesn't feel like celebration. It feels like walking out of a burning building and realizing you still smell like smoke. It feels like hugging your child and knowing they will never fully understand how close they came to losing you. That night, I tucked Liam into bed. He looked up at me and said, "Can we build a treehouse tomorrow?" I smiled, tears in my eyes. "Yeah, buddy, we can build whatever you want." And in that moment, I understood that healing doesn't come from revenge. It comes from choosing to build again. If you have ever had to pick up the pieces of your life after someone tried to destroy it from the inside out, comment, "I'm rebuilding anyway," because your resilience matters. And if this story has reminded you of something you've lived through or someone you love is going through, subscribe to this channel. These stories are not just stories. They are testaments to the strength of people who refuse to be erased. And your story belongs here too. The first morning after the ruling, I woke up before the sun. Not out of habit, not from anxiety, but because for the first time in over a year, my body wasn't clenched like a fist. I sat on the edge of the bed, the silence of the room settling over me like a warm blanket. No court date looming, no lawyer waiting, no accusations circling above my head like vultures. It felt strange, almost foreign, this kind of peace, not the loud, celebratory kind, but the soft, steady one that comes from knowing the storm has passed and the roof held strong. Liam was still asleep in the next room. I walked down the hall and peeked in, the soft rise and fall of his chest anchoring me in the present. The past had nearly stolen this view from me. The lies, the manipulation, the betrayal, they had built a wall between me and this moment. But now, brick by brick, that wall was gone. And yet, as peaceful as it felt, there was a lingering ache in my chest. Because surviving injustice does not automatically erase its impact. I found myself replaying every conversation I had ever had with Emily, searching for signs I missed, moments I should have walked away. I remembered our honeymoon when she insisted we change hotels because she didn't like the way the bellhop looked at me. I thought it was protectiveness. Now I saw it for what it was. The beginning of isolation disguised as care. I thought about the first time she accused me of something absurd. A forgotten lunch date she claimed I purposely missed to make her feel invisible. I had sent her screenshots, proving I was in a meeting. She still cried. She still walked out. And I still apologized. Not because I was wrong, but because I was already conditioned to be the peacekeeper. That's what people don't always understand about emotional abuse. It doesn't show up with black eyes or broken ribs. It shows up as confusion, as self-doubt, as apologizing for things you didn't do just to stop the spiral from spinning. Even now, I had moments where I wondered if it had all been my fault somehow. That's the residue it leaves behind. The nadu, ability to question your own reality long after the truth has been confirmed. I spent that first week slowly putting pieces of myself back where they belonged. I reconnected with friends I had pushed away during the darkest months. I deleted old messages I had reread 1,000 times trying to find hidden meanings. I even packed up the last few boxes of things Emily had left behind and set them outside. Not in anger, but as a final act of release. And Liam? He was thriving. He smiled more, asked more questions, laughed louder. One night, he asked if we could sleep in the living room and watch movies like we used to. We built a fort out of blankets and couch cushions, made popcorn, and watched The Incredibles until he fell asleep on my chest. It hit me then. The simplicity of that moment was more powerful than any courtroom victory. That same week, I got a letter from the State Judicial Board. The investigation into Judge Dalton was complete. He was officially disbarred. The report was brief but scathing. It detailed inappropriate conduct, breach of judicial ethics, and a clear pattern of favoritism influenced by personal involvement. It didn't bring me joy, it brought me clarity. Justice, when it finally arrives, doesn't always feel like a win. Sometimes it feels like a quiet exhale, A whispered reminder that you weren't crazy, that your voice mattered, that the system, flawed as it is, had not completely failed you. I was asked if I wanted to press charges against Emily. The DA said I had a strong case, that with the voice recordings, the screenshots, and the false testimony, I could pursue legal action for defamation, perjury, and even custodial interference. I told them I needed time, because revenge is not healing. And I wasn't sure what justice looked like anymore when the damage had already been done. Instead, I focused on something else, something more urgent, helping others who were still stuck in the silence I had escaped. I started writing, sharing pieces of my story online. At first, anonymously, then with my name. I was scared, vulnerable, but the messages I received made every second worth it. A father in Missouri, who hadn't seen his daughter in 18 months, messaged me, saying he finally had the courage to fight again. A woman from Oregon wrote that after hearing my story, she realized she was emotionally abusing her partner and was seeking therapy. A young man, barely 20, thanked me for showing him that love shouldn't hurt like that love should never demand your silence. It wasn't about being a hero. It was about being real, raw, unfiltered, because that's how we break cycles. By speaking when we're told to stay quiet, by standing when we're told to sit down, by loving again, even when the world tried to teach us that love was dangerous. And slowly, I began to love again. Not someone else, not yet, but myself. I started running again, playing guitar again, cooking meals that reminded me of my childhood without guilt. I took Liam on a weekend camping trip, just the two of us. We built a fire, roasted marshmallows, and he told me stories he had made up in his head. His imagination was wild and beautiful and untainted by the mess we had survived. And as I watched him fall asleep in the tent that night, I made a promise to myself to never let silence steal from me again. If you've ever made it out of something that tried to convince you that your voice didn't matter, I want you to comment, "I am not invisible," because the world needs your voice. It needs your story. It needs your courage. And if this story found you when you needed it most, subscribe. Not just to hear mine, but to remind yourself that no matter how deep the betrayal, how dark the lie, there is always a way back to the truth, and back to yourself. It took me months to realize that healing was not a straight road. Some mornings, I would wake up with hope in my chest, a sense of control, a vision of the future. I was slowly rebuilding. And then there were days I could barely get out of bed. Not because I missed her, but because I missed the man I used to be before everything unraveled, before love was turned into a weapon, and truth had to be fought for in courtrooms, instead of being lived in kitchens, living rooms, and playgrounds. One evening, I was going through some old storage boxes and found a photo of us, me, Emily, and Liam. The three of us smiling, soaked in sunlight at a lake. She had her arm around me. Liam was clutching a melting popsicle. I stared at it for a long time, not because I missed what we had, but because I missed believing that it was real, that I was safe, that family meant something solid. It's hard to grieve the idea of a life more than the life itself. That night, Liam asked if he could sleep in my bed. He hadn't done that since the early days of the custody battle. I asked him why, and he said, "Because sometimes I dream you disappear again." I held him tighter than I ever had, and I made him a promise I knew I would never break. I will always come back. And I realized that's what this whole journey had been about. Returning to myself, returning to the father I was, the man I had buried under doubt and fear and shame. But even in the light of healing, shadows lingered. I started having dreams, not nightmares, more like vivid fragments. I'd hear Emily's voice in the hallway, see the judge's face in crowds. I would relive the moment the courtroom fell silent. After the microphone exposed them, my heart would race, my hands would shake. Sometimes I would wake up and walk around the house, checking the locks, even though no one was coming for me anymore. Trauma doesn't leave when the danger does. It lingers. It haunts. I started writing about it more openly. I shared my story with a podcast that focused on false accusations and family court reform. The host was a woman whose own brother had lost everything to a similar situation. She listened with compassion, but also with anger, because she knew this wasn't rare. It was just rarely spoken. The episode went viral. Thousands of downloads, hundreds of messages from mothers, fathers, siblings, even attorneys who had witnessed similar patterns and felt powerless against them. One message stuck with me. A woman wrote, "My ex made me believe I was crazy. You helped me remember I'm not." That broke me in the best way, because every time I spoke, I wasn't just clearing my name. I was to people who had been silenced, who had been painted as monsters, when all they ever wanted was peace. I got invited to speak at a small advocacy event in Denver. I almost didn't go. The idea of standing in front of strangers and reopening the wounds terrified me. But Maria convinced me. She said healing is not just for us. It's for everyone still walking through the fire. So I went, and I spoke. Not with anger, not with vengeance, but with honesty. I told them about Liam, about the voice messages, about the judge, about the fear, about the strength it takes to keep fighting when your own reality is being denied. After I finished, a man in his 50s came up to me. He didn't say much, just hugged me, and whispered, "Thank you for saying what I couldn't." In that moment, I understood the ripple effect of truth. One voice becomes 10. 10 becomes 100. And somewhere down the line, a little boy like Liam grows up in a world where his dad never had to prove he deserved to be in his life. But there was still something I needed to do. I sat down one night and wrote a letter to Emily, not to forgive, not to open doors, but to close one for good. I told her that I saw through it now, that I had found strength in the rubble, that the boy she once watched fall apart was now a man rebuilding not just for himself, but for others. I told her that her silence, her manipulation, her betrayal, they did not win. Then I folded the letter and burned it in the fireplace. Because some things don't need to be sent, they just need to be released. Liam and I built that treehouse he asked for. It took a few weekends, a few mistakes, a lot of laughs, but when it was done, he called it the safe zone. I asked him why, and he said, "Because nothing bad happens up here." I climbed up with him one afternoon, and we watched the sun dip behind the trees. He leaned his head on my shoulder and said, "You don't have to be sad anymore, Dad." I nodded, because he was right. The storm had passed. The ground was still damp, but the roots were strong. If you've ever stood in the middle of destruction and chose to build anyway, even when your hands were shaking, I want you to comment, "I still chose to heal." Because that choice is everything. That choice is power. And if this story touched something inside you, if it reminded you that hope is still possible, subscribe. Let this channel be your safe zone, a place where truth lives, where silence ends, and where healing begins. One ordinary Tuesday afternoon, something unexpected happened. Liam came home from school holding a piece of paper tight in his little fist. He was grinning, that gap-toothed kind of joy that only kids can wear so genuinely. He ran to me and said, "I wrote about you today." I crouched down and opened the crumpled page. At the top, it read, "My hero." Underneath was a drawing of me and him, standing under a big treehouse, both of us wearing capes. His words were simple, written in careful, wobbly handwriting. It said, "My dad is my hero because he came back when I needed him most. He is strong and kind. He tells me the truth." I had to turn my face away for a second, not because I didn't want him to see me cry, but because I needed a breath before my chest collapsed from the weight of that sentence. He tells me the truth. After everything, that was what stuck with him. Not the courtroom battles, not the chaos, not the lies, but the fact that I had told him the truth when it would have been so much easier to lie or say nothing at all. That night, I framed the letter. I hung it above my desk, not to remind me of the pain I had endured, but to remind me of the purpose that rose from it. I started volunteering with a nonprofit that supported parents dealing with custody injustice. I listened to stories that sounded like echoes of mine. Different names, different faces, same pain, same confusion, same gut-wrenching sense of being erased. One father broke down telling me about the time his daughter called him a monster because her mother said he had abandoned her. He hadn't. He had been locked in a legal battle for nearly 2 years, spending everything he had just to be allowed to wave at his daughter from across a parking lot. His story didn't shock me, but it enraged me, because this wasn't rare. It was epidemic. The system meant to protect was sometimes weaponized by those who knew how to manipulate it best. So I shared what I had learned about documenting everything, about staying calm when everything in you wants to scream, about building a support system even when the world tells you to handle it alone. I watched people light up when they realized they weren't crazy. They weren't broken. They were just caught in a fight they didn't ask for. And slowly, community formed, not just around the pain, but around the recovery. We celebrated small wins, a visitation reinstated, a false claim overturned, a judge who actually listened. Every little victory felt like a rebellion against silence. At home, Liam kept growing. He started asking deeper questions, not just about Emily, but about life, about why people hurt each other, about whether being good always meant doing the easy thing. One evening he asked, "Did you ever want to give up on me?" I looked him in the eyes and said, "Never, not even once." He nodded, as if he had always known, but needed to hear it anyway. That's the thing about kids. They carry questions in their bones long before they ever learn how to form them into words. We started a new tradition. Every Sunday night, we would light a candle, and each say one thing we were thankful for that week. Sometimes it was silly stuff, ice cream, cartoons, a new toy, but sometimes it was heavier. One week, Liam said, "I'm thankful that the bad stuff didn't last forever." I didn't speak after that, just reached across the table and held his hand. The emotional residue still showed up sometimes. A song, a smell, an email from a name I hadn't seen in months. Triggers that reminded me of what had been taken. But now, instead of falling apart, I observed the feeling, acknowledged it, and let it pass like a storm cloud moving across an open sky. I no longer feared being undone, because I had already been undone, and I had rebuilt, stronger, wiser, softer, not harder. Because true strength doesn't come from becoming like the people who broke you. It comes from refusing to. Sometimes I'd get messages from strangers who had followed my story. They'd write things like, "I never thought I'd believe in love again until I saw what you built with your son." Or, "Your story saved me from making the worst mistake of my life." And I would sit there in awe. Not because I thought I was a hero, but because I realized that survival, when spoken aloud, becomes a map for someone else to follow. And I thought of how many lives were changed, not because I won a case, but because I chose to speak. In a world that often rewards silence, telling the truth is an act of revolution. That became my mission, not to relive the pain over and over, but to transmute it, to turn it into something that could grow hands and hold someone else up when they thought they couldn't make it. Liam and I planted a tree in the backyard one spring afternoon. He named it Hope. I asked him why, and he said, "Because even when you plant something small, it can grow really big if you take care of it." So now, every time I look out the window, I see that tree, still small, but standing tall. And I remember, that's all healing ever is, planting something small, taking care of it, watching it grow. If you've ever had to rebuild from the ashes of someone else's lies and still managed to plant something new, comment below, "I planted hope." Your story matters here. Your voice is safe here. And if you want to continue walking this road with us, subscribe to the channel. Together, we turn pain into purpose and silence into strength. The last time I looked in the mirror and saw the man I used to be was months ago. That man was hollow, cautious, bruised in places no one could see. He walked through his days like a ghost, trying to prove to the world he was still worthy of love, of respect, of truth. He whispered instead of speaking. He flinched at kindness because he didn't know if it was real. But the man I see now, he stands taller. Not because the world suddenly became fair, or because justice arrived wrapped in a, but because he learned how to stand without needing permission. He learned that the weight of lies does not define him. How he carried them and laid them down does. The journey through betrayal, accusation, humiliation, and loss didn't make me bitter. It made me precise. I now know who I am, not in spite of the fire, but because of it. I look at Liam now and see more than just a son. I see a witness, a survivor, a spark that never went out, even when the world tried to dim every light around us. He taught me something I never expected to learn from a child: how to begin again, not as a victim, but as a builder. I still have days where the memories hit too hard. Sometimes, when I drive past the courthouse, or when I hear a voice that sounds like hers, my heart skips. Trauma doesn't vanish. It softens, it transforms, and if we're lucky, it becomes fuel. This story, my story, began with a betrayal I never could have predicted. A courtroom full of silence and a accident left on by. But what unfolded was something far greater than revenge or retribution. It was revelation, rebirth, renewal. To the people who doubted me, who whispered behind closed doors, who judged me without ever asking me once what happened, I forgive you. Not because you earned it, but because I don't want to carry you with me anymore. And to the ones who stood by me, who believed in me, even when it cost them something, I thank you, deeply, eternally. Maria, you saved me more than you know, but by sitting with me in the mess, by seeing me when I couldn't see myself. You showed me that family is not always blood, but those who stay when everyone else leaves. To Amanda, for finding the courage to come forward when silence was safer. Your voice was the domino that changed everything. I owe you more than I can say. To every man, every woman, every parent who is still fighting a battle they never asked for, I see you, I believe you, and I promise you, there is life. After this, there is joy again. There is peace on the other side of this war. And if no one has told you yet, you deserve it. You deserve to be heard. You deserve to be loved without fear. You deserve to be whole. This isn't just the end of a story. It's the beginning of something far more important. A movement of voices that will not be silenced anymore. A generation of survivors who will no longer hide in shame. A community that grows louder, stronger, bolder, because of what we've lived. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you, truly. Your time, your heart, your willingness to sit with pain that isn't your own, that matters. And if you felt something here, if this touched a part of you that maybe you didn't even know needed healing, do something brave. Click subscribe. Join this space. Stay with us. Here, we honor the ones who made it through the dark. Here, we speak the names of the silenced. Here, we heal together. And now, as this chapter closes anew, there's another story waiting for you, one that might just give you the strength you didn't know you had. It's on your screen right now. Click it, watch it, feel it. Let it remind you that no matter where you are on your journey, you're not alone. Thank you for walking with me. Until next time, keep breathing, keep building, and above all, keep believing.